Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about.
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant, subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
When you're giving a 2-minute long hug, it changes the whole calculus. You have to get balanced.
That's a cuddle.
Well, it's like a vertical cuddle, yeah.
It becomes like it goes from a hug to a cuddle.
So, but like that kind of thing, like how do you do
I love
that?
how excited you were about that.
Yeah.
She was like, that's cuddling. It's cuddling. I love it. Welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. This is a podcast for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Jacqueline Misla.
Hi, I'm Effy Bloom. On this episode, we're going to talk about online dating and virtual connection with my friend Steve Dean. Steve is a dating consultant for dating sites and individuals. He's a relationship coach and a community builder with a passion for connecting people in all the ways that you can. Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, holding in there, actually. Holding in there.
Yes. Steve, how is social distancing treating you?
Well, given that this is my first vacation in 10 years, my first time not being plugged in to, hundreds or thousands of social connections per day, this has actually been the greatest relief I've experienced in living memory.
Wow.
So I couldn't possibly have looked forward to this more, even though it is, objectively a terrible time.
Yeah. So, all right, give me some context. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with technology that this feels like such a needed break.
Yeah, I guess when I first graduated from college without any job, during the recession, not sure what to do, I decided that it would make the most sense from a longer term standpoint to focus my younger, more energetic years on building social capital. So getting to know people, surrounding myself with all of the people who I'd want in my life for the rest of my life, thinking in terms of like 100-year friendships. And what that led me down the road of doing was building communities, finding out all the different areas of people's lives where they use social capital. So like trying to get a job, trying to get a date, trying to find roommates and friends and build relationships with your family. And, all of these different components of our lives that we oftentimes don't really look at from a very zoomed out point of view. And I decided to. And so I spent basically the last 10 years connecting people, connecting communities. And then just in the last, 2 months, I've finally been able to unplug a bit and reflect on just kind of like what are the connections I've made and what do I want to do with them now? Because I'm hitting that transition point. Next year is my 10-year mark. So I got my vacation a year early and now I'm just deciding what to do.
That's interesting. I definitely hear the duality, Stephen, kind of being a connector, and I want to ask you a little bit more about that, like being a connector and making connector your passion, making connection your passion, your purpose, your kind of what you want to do in the world while feeling overwhelmed by all the connection. So I definitely hear the sort of the duality. Given that you've made sort of connection your purpose, can you tell me a little bit more what that looks like day to day? I know you have an interesting resume. We mentioned things like dating consultant, and relationship coach, and community builder, and definitely your passion for connection. So I'm kind of interested in what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's best to understand it through thinking of it in about 3 different scales. So there's like the micro scale is like, what does connection look like within yourself before you even have to deal with another person? And I had spent years in high school really just like delving into that. I didn't have many friends. I was at a school where I didn't have any of my like middle school friends transfer over. So I had a lot of time to myself because I wasn't good at making friends early on. So at the micro scale, I spent literally 2 straight years just delving into myself, meditating for up to 6 hours a day, really thinking about like who I'm going to be in my life, who I want to be, what are my characteristics. And so I got really good at the like deep inner connection. And then after high school, going into college and thereafter, the next scale came about, which was the interpersonal connection. So I became almost like a localized club leader, group leader, thought leader, community builder. And so I was taking that to the intermediate scale of like hosting events all the time. That's when I got more into like the super connector role throughout New York. I was living across 25 different cities with no apartment, just seamlessly going from place to place. Anywhere I'd go, I'd ask people like who needs a dog sitter, cat sitter, apartment sitter, who needs some dating help, who needs job help. I was running a recruiting company for 4 years. So that was another component of connecting people to meaningful work. In addition to my dating consultancy, connecting people to others in a meaningful way, whether through interpersonal matchmaking or connecting them to the right dating app. But then I got thinking more about like the larger scale. What does it mean to connect the next billion people? And what does that connection look like? And so I got more into consulting for dating companies and companies that are already doing some form of connection at scale. And what I noticed in the dating industry was what kind of drew me in is that the way that it's connecting people is atrocious. It's a lot of times just superficial connections based on physical appearance, making people feel depressed or overstimulated. It's a lot of dopamine-driven swiping actions and things that don't actually make you feel like you've accomplished anything or made any inroads into human connection. You've just like dicked around on the internet for a while. And so I thought that I had a higher calling helping these apps and services stop wasting human attention and actually begin orienting themselves toward deeper connection. Which brings us to, I guess, now, which is, now we can't even physically connect anymore. So all of my interpersonal, experiential, experimental gatherings that I've been hosting for years are kind of bunk. So what do we do now? And so I've been exploring, dozens of different platforms to see, is there a platform that actually lets us experience the quality and texture of connection that actually makes us feel like we've had a meaningful experience with another person? And, video doesn't really cut it that well. And so what can we do? What can the people who are sitting at home alone still do to maintain a sense of connectedness? And at least in this case, I've started off by recommending that people connect with themselves. Take this as an opportunity. You'll get an opportunity later to connect with others, but right now, like, treat this as the way I did in high school when you can't go out and see people. In my case, I didn't know people, but if you just physically can't go outside, then this is the greatest gift society or the world could ever give you for really building out your own relationship to yourself.
I love that you started from that place. And I was actually, as you were talking, I think that was the first thing that stood out for me was the amount of time that you spent in self-reflection, getting to know who you are before you began to connect with others. And that's some of what Effy and I talk about in this work, that you have to know thyself first before you do that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm interested in both the impact of that on your personal experience and how you continue to maintain that relationship with self as you are connecting the billions of people. And in your work with others, as you, I imagine, find folks who are desperate for connection or for work or for dating and partnership, how you coach folks around that first step of first get really clear on who you are and what you want.
Yeah. I think the most important thing that I've found when it comes to building up that relationship to myself is really just getting to know what is my identity and how does it shift and what are the forces that are at play working on it. So it can be like my family, my upbringing, my own inner voice. It can be my mental models about what I think the world is, what I think connection is, who I think of myself as. Like all of these different variables come to play. And if you just go out into the world not really knowing any of these things about who you are or who you want to be, then every new situation calls for, you have to enter this mind state of like, well, crap, who am I? How do I answer this question? How do I know what to do in this situation? And sometimes you default to like old crappy habits. Could be, becoming argumentative, could be jealousy, could be aggression and anger. Or, what I learned and what I found to be most helpful is like, if I really set a course for like who I want to be, who's the version of myself who I could wake up as 10 years from now and be super proud of the work and the progress I've made and like what this person's values are and what Steve 10 years from now stands for, I can start on that process now. And it makes it so much easier to enter almost like a personal flow state. Because then no matter what comes up, tomorrow I have an ethical conflict with a client and I have to decide what to do. I know who I'm becoming. I know the person who I want to become. And as a result, that decision becomes effortless rather than being like a frustrating or high urgency, high pressure scenario. It's a simple and obvious choice because in order to become the person I want to be, who I've charted myself out to be, then like this is the obvious choice.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, Effie spoke about that recently in one of our podcasts around aligning ourselves both internally and in partnership around our values as opposed to behaviors. And so is that a conversation that you're having with your partners around what are our values together? Like, what are your individual values? What are my values? And then what are the values in this partnership that we are working towards?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I always, maybe even too often, insist upon is that people, whether in friendships or relationships, that we are able to talk about the relationship as almost like a neutral third party,
Mm.
almost like the startup that we're building together. It is the thing that, if neither of us believe in it, or if either of us chooses not to believe in it, then like it's really going to be a slog because like a startup with no founders is not really a startup. It's just kind of like a piece of old machinery or
Mm.
old lines of code or letters on paper. Like it's not really real anymore if the people who are like giving it fuel and giving it life no longer understand or agree on what it is. So for me, when it comes to talking through relationships with others, I always like the idea that, you can be checked out of this relationship or extremely enthusiastic about it without me necessarily needing to reciprocate that. And if I don't reciprocate, it doesn't mean that you are flawed as a person. It just means that the idea, this thing that we're building together, is not something that we currently share. We don't have the same like vision of what this future could look like.
Yeah, and I think there's I think that's like so powerful, and it's definitely the way that I structure things when I coach and when I talk about relationships. And I think the other layer that I hear in the way that you speak, and something that I'm very passionate about, is being able to have these different hats that you put on to then then have a connection and design the relationship the way you will. So like the way that you described is this, what I would call like a co-CEO or co-founder hats. And that has a much more of a pragmatic tone where you really think things through in a macro way. Like, where are we going? What are we creating in the world? Why are we together? What are the things that we bring in? What are the things that we want to create with what we've brought in? And what is that third entity, which I think is one of the most powerful things that you can do for your relationship. It's to sort of liberate the relationship itself as its own entity. And then I think the way that you're thinking about it is this co-founder attitude. I think is a really good way to create some space between you and this life project, and design it without necessarily feeling it's all very personal and to do with you directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really scary when like the entirety of a relationship seems to hinge upon every decision you make or every possible reservation you might have. And I think the co-founder hat makes it so much easier to look at the relationship from a more dispassionate stance and think about like, well, I still care about you. It's just the structure of how we're engaging that is like the problem here. It's not that you are the problem. It's just that we may need to pivot a little bit. And a pivot is not ending the startup. It's simply recognizing that market forces have changed, or there's something in the product that we really need to shift in order for this to be truly successful. And it's almost like a high five, let's go do it kind of moment, rather than there's something irreparably wrong
with like we're broken people in a broken relationship.
Too fatalistic for me. I'm an eternal optimist.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I want to shift back to talking about events and sort of right now, like curating events and creating events right now, because I know it's something that you're really passionate about, and it's definitely something that Jackie and I have spent a lot of time talking about over the last month, because just like you, Curious Fox is also, is very passionate about connecting people in a very specific way. And we do that predominantly by gathering people in safer spaces and support them to learn, connect, and thrive together. and we've, since the social distance has become a thing, that is no longer that suddenly that tool that we use to connect people disappeared. And you're one of the people who really understands that, because you're in that world too. You're, like you said, you create awesome events with using very, very simple tools like Post-its or cool venues, and then it's still about putting people in close proximity under one roof and getting them to connect to one another. Now that tool is taken away from us. And I know that we spoke a little bit about how we are looking at, okay, well, if we can't congregate in person, what can we do? What are the ways that we can connect and sort of have similar experiences? And I know that you're passionate about that, and we've tried a couple of events. What are you finding right now that's working for you?
Right now, I'm still in the exploratory phase of trying, it went from, okay, I can host 90% of my things in person. Now it's 100% of things have to be not in person. So there's a lot of growing pains as I attempt to transition each of the different styles of events that I host into the virtual realm. So I'll give a couple examples just to show you where my thoughts are on the process. So I had the Post-it event you mentioned, which is my Huga gathering. And that's really designed to let everyone become a matchmaker across every dimension. So you invite everyone you've ever known into a food court, and as they enter, they're doing the same, inviting anyone they want to bring. And all I do is put little sticky notes out that allow people to converse with one another in small group settings using questions that I've written down that I believe will trigger the most introspection and authentic conversation, and also kind of excited, bubbly fervor for connecting each other to the things that will help us get to the next stage in life. So obviously it works really well in a food court because it's infinitely scalable seating. You can have as many people as you want show up, so I don't need to worry about crowd control. The sticky notes guide the conversation, and that's about it. Doing that online, I tried doing it on a Zoom call. It did not work very well at all. It's hard to, if I guess I had better dexterity with Zoom, I would probably do something like breakout rooms with predefined or pre-assigned questions that could be cycling every couple minutes maybe. But it's not the same. It's not as much people can lead themselves into whatever room they want, which is my ideal for that, where you connect with the people you want, you vote with your feet if you want to change. So that's one example. Another one is I started doing a virtual speed dating event, which is both cool and not cool. It's cool because it gives people the ability to rapidly just connect with others. And it's really cool because the people I invited were all the people I already wanted to be talking to. Getting all of my favorite people into a space where they can spend 3 minutes at a time, or maybe 2 minutes at a time, talking to one another and connecting kind of serves a really cool purpose, even though the ostensible, rationale for joining would be to find someone to date. I think that was a little bit more frustrating. But the things that are not cool about that is that, one, it's only 2 minutes. So right at the point where you're like, oh, I really want to continue this conversation, it's over. And another frustrating part is that the service that I use, this is a new one called firstdate.co, that was actually really cool for speed dating, but there's not yet a feature, they just launched this month, so there's not a feature yet that lets you kind of hang out after. And that's my favorite part, is not I never like the events themselves. I usually like hanging out with the organizers after, talking through what was the cool part about this, highlights and lowlights, who are the people who are going to stick around and keep that community spirit going. Those are the community builders, the ones who stick around after to clean up. So when you get to hang out with those people, that's my favorite part. So because the platform doesn't yet have that, it kind of made me feel like I was missing one of the most critical dimensions of connection. And I guess one other quick example is I used to host slow dating events. So speed dating is a far cry away from slow dating. And what I would do in these slow dating events was teach people a lot of have them essentially teach themselves through easy guiding and rapid partner cycling. I'd have let's say 30 people in a room, and I tell them all, I want you to just walk around the room making eye contact with people. And then after a minute, walk around the room and intentionally break eye contact with people. I had them practice the language of consent, giving enthusiastic yeses and nos. I had them practice then, once they were comfortable with that, finding people to offer fingertip touches to, just tip to tip, as a first way of breaking the touch barrier and asking for consent to do so. so they can get comfortable with both asking and rejecting and being rejected enthusiastically. And then transitioning even from there into like maybe a hand massage, maybe a hug, and then not just any hug. Like I'm going to say you have to hug for a minute or 2 minutes. And like when you're giving a 2-minute long hug, it changes the whole calculus. You have to get balanced.
That's a cuddle.
Well, it's like a vertical cuddle, yeah.
It becomes like it goes from a hug to a cuddle.
So, but like that kind of thing, like how do you do that?
How excited you were about that.
Yeah,
She was like, "That's cuddling. It's cuddling. I love it."
You know, it's interesting. It's like okay, we it's a huddle. It's a huggle. Yeah,
a huggle.
Yeah,
Which is its own dating app if you really want to go there.
Is that right?
Yes. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, though, like that's not a thing we're going to be able to do on Zoom. You know, like it's really hard to do a lot of these kinds of things in virtual realms. And so, you know, that's where I'm at right now. I think what I'm trying to do is find ways of like what has worked personally on myself that I can really encourage people to practice in order to find a greater sense of like self-sufficiency and self-love that you can then model for others that you're with once you get to be in person again, or even, you know, in a video space. I think the coolest thing watching on Zoom in like a business meeting is when someone just starts doing yoga, because like they, you know, they're not needed to be sitting in a very stiff position. Like that's not helping anyone. Like doing self-care and modeling that for others, I think is a really healthy thing to do if you're still, you know, able to be engaged with the call. So I think that's a cool like effect that I'm hoping to trigger a little bit more of. It's just like the recognition that self-care is important and valid and can be done in the presence of others is a cool thing I want to have triggered. But at the end of the day, like it's still trying to scale up from there. It's like I think this is the best time ever to get the self-care part of it done and the personal development and the personal journey mapping. But getting people to actually getting the oxytocin back in the room, I don't know where we're going to get that yet. That's still...
Yeah, so I have 2 questions that I want to dig in based on that. Okay, so I'm interested in from both an individual perspective, so 2 or more people in partnership, in connection, and then in events, connection via events. I've heard in our conversation and beforehand talking about digital connection and virtual intimacy. So first, I'd love to talk through maybe the distinction between digital and virtual. I've been using those things synonymously, maybe I shouldn't be, and connection and intimacy. And Steve, any tips that you have or things that you're thinking about as it relates to individuals connecting and creating intimacy, and then as event organizers, how we create that. And I would, you know, we can talk a little bit about how we've been trying to do that in Curious Fox, but I'm interested from both those perspectives, like a macro and micro perspective around connection and intimacy.
Sure. First, let me disambiguate the digital and virtual for a moment. I used to work in VR. And so virtual reality was like my world for about a year and a half. And that was at the same time that mixed reality and augmented reality both were also popping up. So I had to deal with VR, AR, MR, and AI at the same time.
A lot of acronyms. Just the letters. Just throwing letters at people.
It was really annoying. Right now, I think because the virtual reality side of things didn't really pick up to the same degree that the industry wanted, and it never really became a consumer facing, like not that many people own a VR headset right now. It's not like having
I wish they did. That'd be fun.
Yeah, then things would get really cool really fast. And like something these companies could have done was just sponsor a free headset for everyone and then focus on actually like become the Microsoft, give everyone the platform at once, and then just like let people upgrade the software based on the apps they want to use. Like that would have been the smart play, but no one did that. In part because it's still an early market, but that's beyond the point. Virtual, I think at this stage during like the age of social isolation and lockdown, using virtual and digital interchangeably, I find a little bit more acceptable just because it seems really strange. Like let's have a digital call. It's like we already use VoIP, which is voice over IP, which is a digital call. And that's not the same as like a video chat, which now we're referring to more as like a virtual hangout or a virtual call. So the poor term virtual has just gone under so many different changes. For now,
Steve, the way that I'm finding it, that find the really distinction in my head is that for me, digital is 2D and virtual is 3D.
I mean, that's what it's starting to evolve into again, but this is a new evolution on the term of virtual, which had only just before this pandemic really started to get it, find its stride in virtual reality.
Yeah. I just find everything virtual to be essentially more of an immersive experience, and a digital is more of a two-way like a 2D two-way experience versus virtual experiences has some sort of components of immersiveness, be it like a video call, which has like, you see, not only you see me, but you see my environment, I see you in your environment. We kind of share this weird bubble where we are, somewhat immersed, enmeshed into one another's worlds through a digital tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, and then you see like the new Mozilla hubs, which is where you can have a virtual avatar that actually wanders around a 3-dimensional space or a 4-dimensional space. And then you wonder, like, well, if that's virtual, then what was I just talking about? So,
but that's virtual too, because that's again a 3D experience. Like it's an inverse immersive experience. It's immersive experience. I don't know.
All right. So wait. So now, what's the difference between talk to me about connection versus intimacy? I'm just going to start throwing words now at you guys and see how you fight it out around what it means.
For me, I think connection is the recognition that there are either shared priors between or amongst people, coupled with the recognition that there could be, or maybe the excitement over, potentially shared future attention. So if the people who say like, let's grab coffee, but you never actually want to talk to them again, or the people who message you on a dating app and you're not interested in them and they're like, yeah, let's just hang out, or the people who message you on LinkedIn saying, I just want to pick your brain. Like that's like a bid for connection, but a lot of times we're just like, this is not great. It's not like high quality connection because I don't actually share a desire to like spend future attention on this person. So I think for me, like, I don't want to give that person intimacy because I don't really believe in the power of that connection. And I think that intimacy is frequently something that, it can happen inadvertently. Like you bump into someone at Starbucks and you go to reach for the same straw and then you like giggle at each other. Like that's a moment of like shared intimacy, maybe a moment of like social connection. And then there's like forced intimacy, which is like if you put in a dark room with people, you're going to be intimate pretty quickly, not necessarily sexual, but it's intimate in that you've lost your senses. You're a little more vulnerable. You might start sharing things you wouldn't otherwise have shared with a complete stranger. And then there's like the kind of intimacy you maybe aspire to have with partners and maybe with relatives, like just the tender intimacy you might show to your like ailing loved ones on the hospital bed. Like all of that is still within intimacy. But I look at intimacy as like a lived experience, and connection is more a like almost like a vector. I either am connecting over something we shared in the past, or I'm wanting to strengthen a connection by virtue of intended future attention.
Interesting. Interestingly, as I'm sort of, think about the sort of definition for myself and sort of feeling inspired by what you're saying, Steve, interestingly, it maps onto the same distinction that I'm making in my head to digital and virtual. Like I imagine connection to be almost like touching fingertips together is like I'm connected to you in that moment. We have a channel open to have some sort of a dialogue, be a verbal one, and an energetic one, an emotional one. But it's like a tunnel, like a tunnel opening, like a tunnel that's just open between two people as a connection. And for me, intimacy is, the classic intime you see, which is an immersive experience with somebody, not just flipping on a channel. And that you are kind of, you show up fully and authentically and willing to see and to be seen. And it's the same for the other person. So again, it's like the connection just being a tunnel opening, and an intimacy is an immersive experience shared by, multiple people.
So is it like your Zoom call when you have your mic muted and your video off is just connected on Zoom, but once you turn your video on and it reveals that you're sitting in your living room in your pajamas, then that's true intimacy?
But pretty much. Or the difference between like someone saying, "Oh, hi, how are you?" and going, "I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" That's a connection. That's like I just flipped on a channel. We're connected. I hear your question. I have an answer for it, and it's a satisfying connection. But if I was to then say, "You know what, Steve? I'm actually having a hard day today. I just found it really hard to get out of bed in the morning. It's kind of gloomy outside." Yep. But I've, managed to just pick myself up, and one of the things that really made me like get into the groove of things today was that I was gonna, chat with you on this podcast and sort of see and hear how you're doing. right?
Mhm.
So the difference between like that in the first one was a connection, a willing connection, and the second one is like more of an intimate, like, you know, an intimate experience that I was willing to open up to you and really kind of authentically share what's going on with me, you know, and more of an immersive experience.
Yeah, I definitely like that framing of it. I think that really helps disambiguate the two.
Can I ask a question regarding kind of what we're talking about as it relates to maybe dating trends that you've seen? Because I'm thinking about my own personal experience, and I find that more recently I am connected all over the place, right? I'm connected in work, I'm connected personally with my partners, I'm connected online, I'm connected, but I don't experience as much intimacy as I would like. There is still a hunger for intimacy that I have and deep connection, as opposed to kind of what you've described, Effie, earlier as like, you know, just tactical or practical. Um, and so I'm wondering if you are seeing that too in the age of more digital connection, that there is a desire for more intimacy. And how is that translating to the work that you're doing in the dating world or some of the advice that you're giving to people? Because I find that more and more people want to connect with me. And yet, despite all that, I am just desperately interested in intimate dialogue and not connection.
Yeah, I am so glad you brought that up, because that could not be more on point. If you had to like diagnose the core ailment of the modern dating industry, it's that it's 100% optimized for connection with absolutely no thought placed upon human intimacy whatsoever. And that's mostly, you know, part of the nature of being in business, is that like you have to please your investors, you have to please stakeholders, they're looking for user growth counts, they're looking for whatever metric is you give them, like number of swipes on Tinder, number of matches. But like if you're only optimizing for swipes, then what are you going to get? You're going to get billions of swipes every day, but 70% of your users have never gone on a date on your platform. They've never experienced intimacy. They've only experienced like really, really surface level forms of connection, which can maybe, if you have no other connections in your life at the moment, like if you're stranded in, you know, bumblefuck and you really have no friends, no one there that you know, then it does help to have an app that helps you bring connection into your life very quickly. Like a Tinder can do that, but Tinder is not going to bring intimacy into your life very quickly. Like Tinder can get you to the point of being connected. It does not provide a space for intimacy under almost any circumstances. And so you have to really learn to cultivate that yourself. And ideally, you know, apps could provide a little bit more intimacy. And to the point that Effie was making a little bit earlier, the apps that are coming on the horizon now that are focused more on like video chat first or audio, like phone chat first, the ones that prior to the COVID outbreak that were focusing on getting you face to face with someone in an intimate setting first, those were actually starting to move the needle in terms of bringing a little bit more intimacy into the dating industry. And I mean, they still are. Like my speed dating event, like that's bringing rapid connections. But if someone goes from speed dating into my Huga event, which is designed for intimacy, not just connection, then you can go from, you know, connecting with people to being more intimate with them in the same fell swoop if I'm able to link those events successfully. So I think it's really fun. We're in a fun stage where we're kind of in this petri dish where intimacy has almost not been robbed from us, but because we've lost one of the most critical sources of intimacy, namely that interpersonal time spent together in one another's presence, whether as a group or individually. In the absence of that, we're looking and thirsting for other sorts of intimacy. And so all of the new apps that you're starting to see come out, all the new services, think about like what's that new Netflix show that everyone's going crazy about
One blind
Love is
love or
Blind.
something.
Love is Blind.
Love is Blind.
so-
I managed about 10 minutes of an episode and I imploded. I couldn't handle it, but I love the premise of it.
And it's not just the premise, because like it is part, the premise is one of trying to build intimacy, not just connection. And
Right.
I think one of the cool things that a lot of these new services that are coming out, even the ones that are directly mimicking Love is Blind, like they're setting up blind dates, letting the community get involved and either watch or comment or share. It's taking a connection, forcing it to be intimate in a way through like the almost like not comedic, but the, you know, the theatrical structuring of the narrative. You know, these two people, everyone's going to watch at the same time. Watch them become intimate. Watch them experience this form of human intimacy, whatever that will look like as they define it. these are the apps that are on the horizon right now. I know 3 different people building either apps or services tied to that same Love is Blind model, like connecting strangers, potentially having their friends watch, and witnessing intimacy unfold in front of you, because you're clearly not, most people are not physically in a position where they can experience, meaningful intimacy if they're stuck in social isolation.
Tell me about why the voyeurism? Why the element of the friends watching?
I mean, if you're not having sex with a partner right now, you might be watching porn. It's the next closest thing you can conceive of to the kind of touch, the kind of intimacy, the kind of arousal that you may want. And so if people aren't able to have those like meet cute moments the way they used to, because they're not meeting at coffee shops, they're not meeting at bookstores, they're not meeting at parks, they're not meeting through friends, they're not meeting at church, every single way that people used to meet is now like gone. And it's now just, well, it's the internet. So we're feigning intimacy in the best ways that we can.
Steve, don't you find I've been finding the Zoom calls actually intimate in a very different way, meaning because of the nature of our what's going on right now, every Zoom call is done most of in our home. So even those people who are dating on dating apps and then maybe deciding they want to have Zoom dates, like you're immediately in someone's home in a way. It's like there's something about very much sort of having people in your home immediately feeling into it. And you kind of have to decide how you want to do that and what they can do and the tone of that, even with things like, right now, I do a lot of my coaching sessions online, like virtually, and I've also been doing my personal therapy sessions online. And what's been interesting is that suddenly, these people are in my home and I'm in their home, and there is something about, I think there's some sort of like there's some different version of intimacy there. And on another topic, we've been trying to figure out how do we create that intimacy for the Curious Fox events. And one of the things that to me it's fascinating, and I love that we have a community like Curious Fox of people who are willing to connect. And over the last 4 years, we sort of really homed in this idea of learn, connect, and thrive together. And we also do in events, we've introduced these events called soirees, which are our connection events. And we do things like date nights and flirt nights. And it's like, it's where we invite our community to come together and connect in an intimate way with potentially to meet people to date. Whereas our other events are more about community building and learning and supporting one another. So we kind of set these soirees up so that it's like our intimacy and connection events. And we had one scheduled a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't want to abandon it. We were like, we've had the schedule, we want to do it. And so what can we do? So the team, Jackie, Carolyn, and I sat together, and we looked at what are our soirees about? Like, what is it that in real life that we're trying to achieve with the soirees? And one of the things that was the intimacy and people to sort of get to know each other and potentially to flirt, right? And I want to pick your brains about like how do you get people to flirt and get into a flirty mode, right? And also sort of have these intimate conversations. And one of the things that we came up with,
and to do that with a variety of experiences. So we did different stations, different rooms. In the past, in person, we were able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like we did one where, we sort of mapped the love languages into different experiences within the soiree and got people to sort of both learn about themselves, learn about other people and their partners, and maybe learn a skill or a further understanding. And then, so for the soiree, we've decided to sort of see what we can do. And one of the places that I really was passionate about was priming the people. And I'm going to sort of pick your brain about that. So something that I sort of borrowed from designing other type of experiences. We've adopted this idea of set and setting. And we're guiding people on, okay, this is an event that you're about to like get a tunnel into. Like, it's not a venue, so you're going to have to kind of prepare yourself and prepare your environment so that you can be a part of an online experience, an immersive virtual experience, and to sort of guide people through set and setting. So mindset, Like, how do you want to be? Do you want to be, do you want to come in with flirty attitude? Do you want to feel, ready, open and wanting to connect? Do you want to sort of be your best funny self, or do you want to be more of a listener? So really think about your mindset as you're like logging into the space. And setting, like, look at your environment. If you're about to walk into a dance party, if you're about to log into a dance party, maybe like turn your lights down and figure your setup up so that you can be, standing up. If you're coming into a cozy event, which is something that we were doing, we're like, let's do a pajama party. You get comfy, you curl up on your couch. We had people like joining us from their beds, like in pajamas, and to really kind of prime people coming into an experience. Do you find that that's something that can really make a difference?
Oh, 100%. As the last like 3 or so weeks have begun to reveal, if you've been to, a series of different kinds of events, I've been to business networking chats, I've been to salon style talks with discussion after. I've done the virtual slumber parties. Like, all of this stuff is happening virtually. And in each case, it is a completely different energy level. Some things, even just like time of day, especially if people are tuning in from different time zones. My friend just hosted a slumber party from Bali. So it's her 10 a.m., our 10 p.m. So like it's bright and sunny on her side. And for everyone else, they're in their pajamas. And she wore her pajamas in solidarity. And she was the host, so like it made it even easier for her to like kind of set that setting the way she wanted to. But I think it does make a big difference, like what vibe you bring to the situation. And I think that the challenge for the host is just as real as it always has been. If you have an event that doesn't really allow for people who show up with different energies to find their place, then they're going to have a bad time. So it's the same where, like, if you have a club and you don't have a quiet space for someone to just like decompress a little bit, maybe they're not ready to hit the high energy yet. Maybe they don't want to jump right into dancing. I've been frustrated by any kind of Zoom call where you're expected to have to contribute, especially from within moments of arriving. Because a lot of times, like, you're not ready for that. You're just trying to get a sense of like, what's going on here? What's the vibe? And if someone's like, oh yeah, you're going into a breakout room, you only just arrived, but now you have to go talk about these things on camera. It's like, oh my God, like, what's happening? I didn't even put pants on yet. I was hoping to be a lurker for a couple minutes just to get the vibe. So it is important for the organizers here to be mindful of like who's coming, where are they coming from, what are their priors before they arrive, and what are the spaces you're creating within this virtual realm where people can kind of find out where they fit and then vote with their feet in order to fit in appropriately. And in more like binary events where it's like, there's only one thing happening here, it's a talk, and you can either show up or you like don't, you just leave or you skip the event. That's currently what I see as like the most common situation is just like, if you don't want it, then you close out of Zoom and you go about your day, live your life. But I think that the more, I guess, perceptive or diligent community organizers are thinking of like, this is what makes you a community organizer. It's that you actually think about all of the different members of your community and what their experience might look like. And what is it that they're actually searching for? What does connection look like for them? And how do they get there? And some people have a slower or more roundabout process for getting to a point of connection. Maybe because they have reservations, they're scared, they're confused about how to present themselves digitally, they're not used to being on video, they're more worried about how they look because this is a new experience for them. They're worried about their dirty kitchen. There's a lot of things that like every person will come to your event, digital or otherwise, with just like things on their mind, things that they bring to the table. And I think it's so helpful to be able to think through all of those different, essentially like rooms that could exist for them, spaces, breathing times, ways of getting everyone on the same page, giving people the vote so that they can actually choose, like, is this the best? If we're in a pajama party, do we want to switch this whole thing into a dance party, or should we only have that in a breakout room and then let everyone else, chill out?
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of the things that I keep hearing you say, Stephen. I like it, is that the idea is like voting with your feet. So just following what feels good for you, and to go in and out of these sort of experiences within an event. We definitely tried that out where. The way that we created our flow for soiree was bringing people into a dance party, but we were holding people in a waiting room and we were priming them in the waiting room to what they're about to walk into. So it's really interesting you sort of to say that. So people are just like, oh, where am I into? And we that's something that we really thought about, and we're like, okay, we don't want people to just drop into a bunch of people doing something and not knowing what's going on as we check people in. So we kind of let people know while in the waiting room what you're about to go
Almost
into.
like standing in line before you get into the club. That if you use the virtual reality experience in your mind, that they were standing in line, they had to be checked in and show their ticket. Then they were entered into the room. They could be a voyeur, or they could participate. They could dance alone or with other people. There was a live DJ that was there, and then we like settled everybody in. We had different breakout rooms. People got to vote on which rooms they went into, if they wanted to play games, if they wanted to have intimate conversation. We did some sexy storytelling. So there was a lot of variety, to your point. So I think that that's interesting, because I think that as event planners and community organizers and community builders, it was in our instinct to do that. And so I think there's a certain amount of validation as you're sharing it through. We're like, okay, our instincts were right. Like, we were doing the thing. Essentially what we were saying to each other is, what would we do in person? And how, as best as possible, do we translate that online? And that was our goal.
So did you already have this event that you're describing online?
We did.
Like what you're describing is
Yeah.
the online version of it with the breakout rooms and all?
Yeah.
We
did.
did all that.
Well, I'm sad that I missed that one.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it again.
We're gonna do it again.
It was great. It was great. It was great.
I just did one 2 weeks ago, and it was probably the best online event that I've ever been part of. It was like 100-person online slumber party, and the breakout rooms were things like Truth or Dare.
We did that.
Drawing, so like figure drawing, someone would model and everyone would draw them.
And
I
love it.
One of the things that I found was like kind of fun was just like there's opportunities for intimacy that, like, if you don't take them, they'll never exist, and so you just kind of have to take it when you see it. So like in the case of Truth or Dare, like, what's a truth that we could get people to like really open up about? And so one that we thought would be kind of fun and like flirty, but also just like, satisfying to do, would be draw what your ideal like sexual fantasy would be while in quarantine. So it can be like a little comedic, but also a little serious, open you up a little bit, like you're getting into a spicy topic, and you're also being creative and artistic about it. So like if you're terrible at drawing, then it just gives everyone else the ability to like play the guessing game of like, what is going into what thing?
Nice.
So like those kinds of things build more intimacy, not just connection. It actually does like keep you, more open. It lets you talk about topics that you may otherwise have been reserving for pillow talk. And like on that topic, like that's pillow talk is one of the first things that I wanted to do in light of social isolation. Because I just thought like the most obvious app would be like, how can you just be instantly connected to someone who's going to just lay down with you? Like you put your phone in front of your bed and then just like talk about life as you're getting ready to go to sleep. And I feel like that's just like such a comforting way of like, there's no time limit. Like you get like one person per night maybe, or, that kind of a thing where it doesn't matter who it is. It's more that like, you're just taking this time to open up about like what the hell you're going through to a stranger. And that could be a good way of just like practicing each night. Like, what does intimacy look like for this person? And like the only rule is that you have to be next to your pillow. Like this is not an app. You don't go into it unless you are getting ready to go to bed.
Yeah. And there's something that's so interesting about that, because I think that resonates both in the work that I do with others and myself around, sometimes it is about the person on the other side, and sometimes it's not. It doesn't matter who is the person on the other side. It's about real conversation and sharing a vulnerability. And sometimes not having a life experience with the person on the other side actually allows one to open up some more, because you're not worried about what people are going to think or worried about these other things. And so I'm interested in that as it relates to, what are you hearing from your clients now and the folks that you're working with in terms of their desire for flirting or for connection in this space? Like, what are some of the things? And you're going to be doing a workshop for us coming up soon, so I'm excited about that, and you'll share out some more details there. But what are some things that you're sharing out with folks around how they can access connection, how they can access romance and flirtation vibes and all those things as they're in quarantine?
Well, people certainly have a lot more time on their hands in which they can be coming up with creative ideas for getting to know someone, for getting to know themselves. One of the things that I've always done as a way of just like stacking my intimacy with my personal development and my self-care is thinking of the things that I can do on my own that my partner could do, whether with me or not, but in a way that lets us both kind of unlock each other's love languages. So, for instance, I can, on my own, practice giving myself a really good hand massage. And then for a date, even if it's a virtual one, I can start showing off what I'm doing and encouraging my prospective date to try it on themselves to see like what feels best for you. So you're still getting that level of like intimacy and like you're basically not doming, but you're you're giving each other the opportunity to model for each other what you like in a way that's completely safe because there's not going to be any groping or unnecessary escalation here. It's just showing like this is a thing that I've been working on that I'm really excited about. So it's like a show and tell, but for touch. And then if you were to do that in a different domain, so like what about words? You can think about like what's a poem that you can write for this person in light of having only known them through their profile. And then after a week of talking to them, maybe like does the poem shift? What becomes of that first poem? And how different, like if the poem significantly shifts, then maybe their profile wasn't doing a very good job of capturing them relative to who they are through a week of talking. Like you can do like a longitudinal connection exercise with people. And that's for words of affirmation. For acts of service, it could be like, what's a thing that would make let's exchange $5 gifts that we can ship to one another while we're on lockdown. Like there's or even like one we could make for each other. And assuming we're in lockdown, we're not going out. We're probably relatively safe to like send something in the mail. So like that's an option. Although obviously giving your address could be a weird thing for people.
One of my favorite gifts / acts of service has been playlists.
Ooh.
Some wonderful, kind, sweet people in my life have come to my rescue, and I've got a friend who's giving me like 20-minute 5 rhythm waves. Like that means nothing to anyone, but essentially these like 20-minute playlists that are really strong and they take you through an experience. And I've had other friends who are like sharing their like specially made Spotify playlists for me, and it's been like it's a great way to. It's like acts of service and gifting at the same time. And it's just been wonderful. And when I'm feeling a particular way, I know that like, my good friend has sent me something to cheer me up, or I've got another one that, to chill out. Yep. So, and it's been so powerful. It's been one of my favorite things.
It's also words of affirmation if you're factoring in the lyrics, because sometimes like you just don't know what to say to someone, but this song captured it perfectly and you just play them the song and let that do the work.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So that's been a nice sort of gesture to send around for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Just another question as it relates to dating, because now that I have you, I'm going to pick your brain on all the things, Steve Dean. You, I imagine, have to be very good at scheduling. And I'm thinking about that just because while I am so there are the folks in my, world and my network who are saying, oh, I have so much free time. And then there are the others, including myself, who have literally scheduled out every minute because of I have responsibilities as a parent and as a partner in my home and in my business and with my clients. And so scheduling in the open and non-monogamous and polyamorous world is already a topic of conversation constantly. Even more so, I think, for myself in this space and some folks that I know. And I'm interested just around that. Like, what are your tips around how to schedule time for yourself and for others, as I imagine that you have multiple connections?
Yeah, I mean, that's been certainly a struggle on one hand, because I live with one of my partners. So like as a polyamorous individual with multiple partners in New York and also around the country and around the world, living with one partner makes things kind of strange because, how do I have intimate time with my other partners when I only have I'm in the exact same shared space with one partner who's not going anywhere. So it's not like I can just like call up for phone sex with another partner while I'm, laying in bed with my current partner. It's certainly made things more awkward on that frontier. Scheduling has been kind of a nightmare because it's not just like partners, it's also friends. There's, I used to, the reason that I hosted events for so long in many ways was to make it so I didn't have to have one-on-one coffee chats with 100 friends. I could just have an event where all 100 friends showed up and got to know one another, we got to have little one-on-ones here and there, almost like micro breakout sessions where I got to like have a really deep heart-to-heart for like 5, 10, 20 minutes with one friend at a time. So I'd host events that made that happen. So now, without being able to do that as much, like honestly, the speed dating thing I did was the most like efficacious use of my time, because I got to talk with like 11 different friends for 3 minutes each to see like, okay, what's your life? Should we schedule a really intense follow-up to like do a deep dive? Is everything good? Getting to do that was really nice. Like friend speed dating, I think, is a new thing we might start seeing, like friend roulette, like one-on-one time with friends on repeat. Just to like knock out some of that, like you don't want to feel guilt over like, oh, I have so many friends I could be chatting with, texting right now, they're not going anywhere. But like, who do I message and when and how often? And should I be like committing to like, oh, we're going to chat every week? But then it's like, oh my God, all the time is like flowing into itself because nothing is changing in my physical space. I don't know if you've gotten sucked into those time warps where I can look up and a week has passed and I'm like, wait a second, everything on my to-do list was the same from last week. Like, where did the week go? How is this happening? There's so little variation from day to day sometimes. I don't know that there's a perfect answer to how to schedule it well, other than maybe trying to do I've seen a couple. I'll give some examples of what I've seen. One, giving out like a Calendly or other like scheduling link to your friends and just being like, grab a time on my calendar, like whatever works for you. I just want to see your face. I don't care when, just like pick what time that works. And then we're going to make it happen. That's one. Another one is like the friend speed dating. So finding a way or a service or a platform where you say, I just want to get everyone who I want to be talking to one another doing it. And we're going to do it in like little bursts, get everyone's attention in the same place at the same time, and then let it go. When it comes to partner time, I think project-based can be the best because then it stacks with something else. So like I have a friend who's a yoga teacher, and like I can just literally pay her for her time as a yoga instructor doing yoga together and then chat afterwards. It can be, let's see, another like fun project-based thing. Like I did candle making the other week.
I saw your candles online.
Yeah. So like
virtual candy on your own, or like it was a Zoom candle making.
So that one was in person. And we followed like the best and strictest quarantine procedures we could. We like did our 2 weeks of, isolation. And we're like, okay, we had one person we wanted to have join us. And so we're like, okay, what are all of our risk factors? Can you bike here? Are we okay? Are we going to sanitize, like have a sanitizing station when you get here? So we managed to make that work. But that could have just as easily worked virtually if we had just picked a couple friends to join us and then done it that way. I just did a writing session virtually where you just simply, and even after this, I have at 4:00 today, I have a session coming up where it's someone who I want to start a future show with. And we're going to be doing just like being in the same hangout space so that we get that sense of like, hey, like I got your back here. And we don't have to be talking to one another. We don't have to be doing anything, but we generally have like things we want to be focused on during that time. So it's almost like co-working together.
I've been co-working with people, and to be honest, it's been a godsend for me.
Yeah, it's real. And even I guess another one I just did this morning. It's a thing called, we do meaningful mornings. And so twice a week for an hour, we start off with stretching together on camera with one person leading the stretches. So we can just get our bodies moving early in the morning, getting some blood flow. And then we switch into like the basic mindfulness practices that you'll see recommended by all sorts of self-help books and like Tim Ferriss and the like. So it's like, what's something you're grateful for in general? What's a win from yesterday? And what's a big priority for today? And it's like 3 simple questions, and you just share them all across whoever's present. And it allows for the sense of like community solidarity. You address like your physical needs. It gets encouraged, like if you need water or coffee, like do it. And then it's, you're off to the races after that. But it's a check-in that grounds you with the people you care about, usually early in the morning. So that there are quite infinite numbers of ways to connect with oneself and with other people still, even without being face-to-face. So I'm honestly like not super worried. I think we're just going to get really good at doing it and at like coming up with different styles of connection. That once we start seeing each other face to face again, then I'm hoping that we'll be so much more grounded in like who we are, what we like, that we will be much more readily capable of saying no to the things that aren't what we want. We'll have better standards for the kinds of things that we like, because it's harder to like leave an event that's annoying than it is to just close a Zoom call. So like, you kind of have to do a good job. I think we're going to get better at that. My only fear is for the people who don't have either access to those communities or awareness that these kinds of communities exist, that these kinds of tools exist, people who are just kind of like not really of the digital age, so they're not knowing like where to look. The ones who would sooner click an ad than do a Google search, so they're not going to like get access to the highest quality information. And so I worry about those kinds of people where like they're already isolated to begin with. It's not like they're just transitioning from a offline community to an online one, which is just, it's not that big a transition, all things considered. I think that's like, I think of like my friends and my family who grew up, relatively isolated in Pennsylvania in the small towns. So like they're not plugged in to the world in a way. And so when the world suddenly stops, like, it's not just that it stops, it's more that like if they can't see their own communities that are offline already, then where do they go? Like they're not used to just going inward. They're not used to going online. And so what are they going to do in the face of this? How stir crazy are they going to go? How much lonely are they going to be? How much more at risk of depression and suicide might they become if they can't even now like feel safe going to the pharmacy for what they need to keep them healthy?
And I wonder, to your point, does this then force introspection? Does this force creativity? Like, do we emerge from this more creative, more reflective, more grateful for connection, for the people around us than we were before? Certainly seeing that now in terms of our support and rally around teachers and service providers and hospital staff that existed before. And, my hope certainly is that that doesn't go away once COVID-19 does. I'm first of all, super excited about all the practical. I think that I'm the type of person that I love the concepts. I love being inspired. I love being motivated, but I also love when someone says, and you can write a poem or you can do a hand massage. And so I'm appreciative, Steve, for all of the concrete information, because I think that right now, some of what we are all experiencing is decision fatigue. As we are trying to emotionally deal with everything that's going on. And so hearing some real practical advice around how we can connect in different ways and still feel loved and cared for is amazing. And I'm going to take that to plug what's happening on April 8th at 7 p.m., which is you're going to be coming back. And you're going to be doing a whole workshop for us. And you're going to be talking about dating apps and kind of online communities that have sprung up to address what's going on virtually. You are going to be talking about updating dating profiles and messaging in light of social isolation, creative dating ideas, sexting strategies. I love like photography tricks. I'm interested in that. And learning all about kind of how do we navigate this new space.
I'm really excited for that because it's basically all of the stuff that I've been I've already been well versed in it from long before social isolation began, in part because I kind of like intentionally built social isolation for myself as a child. And I just know like what it's like to commune with oneself. But also, just work over the last 10 years has definitely brought out a lot of like, I have way more strategies and individual examples than I could ever share, even in multiple books. So it's more just like I love the opportunity to do this in a workshop format where it's not just me having to like sit alone and come up with even more ideas, but instead I can bring people in and have them like whatever the question is, it allows me to be even more creative in answering it and directly tying my answer to like what this person's specific needs were, and then relating that back to the whole group so that we can see what we can take away from it. I think workshop style is just, it's so satisfying to be able to do because it lets people open up more. It lets them feel a sense of, having their most either vulnerable questions they were afraid to ask, then be asked by other people in the room. So they're like, wow, I'm not that alone. I'm not that weird. And then it lets me also just kind of brain dump what I can so that people can then respond to it and see, like of these 50 different tactical approaches to coming up with date ideas online or offline, which are the ones that'll work best for the like community of people with alternative relationship styles or alternative sexualities or people who are confined with a partner versus who are just completely alone with no hope of seeing anyone for the next couple months. That's a completely different world that person could be living in. And so there's no one strategy that's going to work for everybody.
Yeah. And to your point, I think in our last event, the soiree that we were talking about, one of the things we heard consistently was people saying, I love being in this space because I don't feel like I'm crazy, or I don't feel alone, or I don't feel like I'm weird, or I don't feel, and to your point, if we can continue to create spaces individually out there, if you're listening, if you can create spaces for people to be really seen and heard, and for you to do the work yourself so that you can show up in a way that's authentic so that you can be seen. And for all of us who create spaces for community, if we can continue to do that for people, particularly during this time, I think I'm excited about the impact of that once we leave here. Once we leave out of our homes collectively and go back out into the sunshine, that we've created real space for each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, other than the workshop that we're on April 8th, we can also find you, Steve, in various places, right? Your website, dateworking.com is where people can find you. I hear that you're hosting some awesome shows on an interesting little platform called Get Vocal. That's Get VOKL, right? Get Vocal. It's like this cool platform between essentially social media meets video conferencing, which I find, we're playing around with as well.
Yeah, I describe it as Eventbrite meets Zoom, so you can have both the event discovery and the production in the same space. But what I like most about it is that the producers, like the people who are actually like the hosts, hang out there. So I'll be hanging out live in my room before starting an event, so people can just come and talk to me beforehand, and I can hang out after, and they can stay on as well. And even if I'm switching into a different event, there's still the core room where my attention lives, and so there's it feels a lot more intimate than most other things where you just jump onto a link and then that's really the only place and the only time you get to see that person. And what I've been thinking through with that particular platform is what are all the different fun ways that you can get people to engage? So I'm doing office hours where I bring on dating app founders and talk to them. I'm doing a thing I called Ask the Sexperts, where I bring in people who are experts in sexuality and even sexual therapists, and ask them what the hell should we be doing right now in light of us not having sex or not being able to have the kind of sex we want to have. And I'm also about to see if I can transition more of my otherwise offline events onto that same platform for getting people to do slow dating, getting people to connect more meaningfully, and just kind of experimenting on it, because it is a really fun platform that I've been enjoying lately.
Yeah, it's definitely a time of experimenting. I definitely have an urge to sort of look at all these platforms and see what we can create and experiment. And if you listeners out there want to know what we're experimenting with at Curious Fox, you can follow us on pretty much all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, at We Are Curious Foxes. So you can follow us at We Are Curious Foxes, especially in Facebook and Instagram. And as you heard, Curious Fox is and was all about events, and we no longer do events. We're no longer able to do in-person events, and we are putting all our attention, effort, and creativity in creating other wonderful experimental connection events online. And we do need your support during this time. So if you can, we do have a Patreon page. You can find us again at patreon.com/We Are Curious Foxes. We can really we appreciate your support. We're also posting specific fun events for our Patreons. So one is coming up on tomorrow, April 1st. It's going to be our Curious Fox socials. So we are moving our socials to Patreon's only event. So some of the things that we talked about in the way that we've connected people, we're going to do that for the social. We want to have a meaningful conversation about what's happening with people, what's working for them, what their wins, like we talked about earlier, what are some of the struggles, how are we feeling? And that's going to happen tomorrow at 7:15 on the 1st of April. So that's another place where you can connect with us. And one other thing, wherever you're listening to us right now, please like us, review us, and share the podcast, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. Please leave us a review. It makes a difference. It puts us on the map and gets us to fulfill our mission of changing the noise. So #change the noise is what we're all about. So please like us, review us, share us, and keep listening.
If you are also interested in being away from technology for a little bit and you don't want to go on to Facebook or Instagram and Patreon, you can actually use this old school thing called a phone, and you can call us. We have a hotline. I don't know if you knew that. So Curious Fox Podcast Hotline. Our phone number is 201-870-0063. If you leave a question on there for us, then we will play your question on a future podcast, and Effy or I will weigh in, or maybe we'll ask one of the folks, one of the experts that we bring on to interview, to weigh in on your question. So it's 201-870-0063, or you can shoot us an email if you want to give us feedback, if you want to share a review, if you want to share a question, at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. Thank you so much to Steve, and from all of us at Curious Fox, we encourage you to stay curious.
Curious friends.
Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.